There's an image that lives on in the memories of anyone who experienced the cultural whirlwind of the late 1960s. A figure riding a gleaming chopper down an open American highway, the wind ripping through his hair, the stars and stripes emblazoned on his jacket. That figure was Peter Fonda in the groundbreaking film Easy Rider. In that moment, he became both an icon of rebellious youth and a living embodiment of the spirit of change sweeping across the country. But behind that famous ride was a young man grappling with a storied Hollywood lineage, a restless heart that wouldn't be satisfied by the conventional route, and a determination to carve out something entirely new in an industry he felt had grown stale. How did a quiet boy from one of cinema's royal families manage to spark an indie film revolution? And what kind of personal toll did that revolution take on him? By the time we finish this journey, we might feel we understand not just the rebel on the motorcycle, but the thoughtful, passionate trailblazer who shaped decades of filmmaking to come. Peter Henry Fonda was born on February 23, 1940, in New York City. As the son of legendary actor Henry Fonda and his second wife, Frances Ford Seymour, Peter entered the world already saddled with a famous last name. The Fonda household was an interesting mix of Hollywood glamour and Midwestern roots. Henry Fonda had grown up in Nebraska, carrying a certain no-nonsense approach to life. By the time Peter arrived, Henry was a towering figure in American film, best known for roles like Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath and Juror Number 8 in 12 Angry Men. For a boy born into that orbit, expectations ran high from day one. Tragedy struck when Peter was only 10. His mother, Frances, passed away in 1950, leaving behind Peter and his older sister, Jane Fonda, who would later become a prominent actress and activist herself. That early loss weighed heavily on Peter's childhood, shaping his quieter and more introspective side. In interviews much later, he revealed that he struggled to cope with her absence, often feeling overshadowed by both his father's lofty legacy and the emotional vacuum that remained in their home. He was drawn to reading, daydreaming, and exploring imaginative worlds, an early hint that he might flourish in a creative field. But he also carried a certain restlessness, a desire to strike out on his own, to shrug off the burdens of tradition. As a teenager in the 1950s, Peter attended various prep schools. He was well-liked but somewhat aloof, known more for his gentle demeanor than for any reckless mischief. He developed a fascination with motorcycles, a passion that, at the time, wasn't exactly common in the privileged circles he inhabited. The open road offered him a sense of freedom, an escape from the expectations placed upon Henry Fonda's son. By the late 1950s, he decided to pursue acting, figuring it was a natural path given his family history. Yet from the beginning, he wanted to do it his own way. His entry into acting came in the early 1960s. He studied at the University of Nebraska, Omaha for a spell, then moved to New York to join the acting scene. Early roles found him on stage, honing his craft off-Broadway and occasionally picking up small parts in television shows. Audiences might have recognized him in guest spots, but there was no immediate catapult to stardom. Peter's early career paled in comparison to the headlines his sister Jane was making as she launched her own acting journey in the 1960s. Henry Fonda's success loomed in the background, casting a long shadow. Still, Peter persisted, determined to find a unique style and a voice that felt natural to him. The 1960s were an era of radical change, especially for the young. There was an undercurrent of rebellion against what was seen as a stifling societal order. The Vietnam War ignited protests, the civil rights movement fought for equality, and the rise of counterculture music and lifestyles shook the traditional norms. Peter, in his late 20s, found himself drawn to these new ideas. He mingled with artists, musicians, and free thinkers, forging friendships with folks who believed Hollywood needed to break free from old formulas. He sensed that something exciting, something fresh, could be done if only people dared to challenge the status quo. That sense of defiance led him to the doorstep of independent film. Unlike many actors who were content to chase a contract with a big studio, Peter craved a project that felt truly of its time, wild, unvarnished, and full of the rebellious energy that crackled in the streets. He found that spark in The Wild Angels, 1966, a low-budget biker film produced by American International Pictures. Playing a Hells Angels member called Heavenly Blues, Peter tapped into his love of motorcycles and his personal taste for rebellion. It wasn't highbrow cinema, but it gave him a taste of creative autonomy. He was no longer just Henry Fonda's boy. Now he was the face of an emerging subgenre of gritty counterculture flicks that appealed to younger audiences. Still, the real turning point came in 1969 with Easy Rider, a film Peter co-wrote, produced, and starred in. Directed by Dennis Hopper and financed on a shoestring budget, partially with the help of actor-producer Bert Schneider, Easy Rider was a gamble from the start. There were almost no big studio strings attached, allowing Peter and his team the freedom to shape the story in their own image. He played Wyatt, often referred to as Captain America, riding a custom Harley across the American Southwest alongside Dennis Hopper's Billy. The journey in the film was symbolic of the youth culture's search for meaning in a country torn between mainstream conservatism and a free love, anti-war revolution. Every mile of road captured that sense of disillusionment and hope that marked the late 1960s. The filming itself was chaotic. Budgets were tight, the crew was small, and tensions sometimes ran high between Peter, Dennis Hopper, and the rest of the team. They traveled to actual locations, encountering real locals. There was no comfortable Hollywood set. Instead, they were out in the scorching sun dealing with breakdowns. But that authenticity bled onto the screen. When Easy Rider premiered, critics and audiences were stunned. Here was a movie that dared to speak the language of a new generation, a language the studios barely acknowledged. It combined a rock soundtrack, raw cinematography, and improvisational acting to create something that felt revolutionary. The film became a box office hit, earning millions off its modest budget and capturing the zeitgeist like few movies ever had. Peter Fonda, wearing his star-spangled jacket, instantly became the poster child of a counterculture that championed freedom and defied convention. The success of Easy Rider also shook the Hollywood system to its core. Suddenly, major studios realized there was real money in youth-oriented, independent-minded projects. In the wake of Easy Rider came the so-called New Hollywood era, where directors like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and George Lucas were given more creative leeway. Peter, often overshadowed by the massive stardom of his father and sister, had arguably ignited the spark that allowed a wave of independent filmmaking to flourish. During the early 1970s, Peter tried to leverage his newfound fame to push for even more creative control. He directed and starred in the psychedelic drama The Hired Hand, 1971, hoping to capture some of the same experimental spirit that had fueled Easy Rider. He also took a turn directing Idaho Transfer, 1973, a low-budget science fiction film that explored environmental and social themes. Neither matched the cultural impact of Easy Rider, though critics noted that Peter was taking genuine risks with unconventional storytelling. He remained steadfast in his belief that the old studio system needed to be challenged and that artists should own their work rather than simply star in a producer's vision. Yet, like many icons of the 1960s, Peter struggled to navigate the transitional phase of the 1970s. The idealism of the counterculture had begun to fade, marred by political setbacks and a growing disillusionment after the war in Vietnam dragged on. The film industry was also changing rapidly. While New Hollywood opened the doors for some directors, it eventually led to big-budget blockbusters that overshadowed smaller, more experimental fare. Peter, though revered for his role in Easy Rider, found it hard to replicate that level of box office success. He took roles in independent features, B-movies, and the occasional studio picture to pay the bills, but the mainstream never fully embraced him as a leading man. Perhaps they found his vibe too unconventional, too tied to the rebellious spirit of the 1960s. In personal terms, the 1970s were a time of self-reflection for Peter. He continued to love motorcycles, the open road, and the idea of forging an individual path. But he also carried the weight of a complicated relationship with his father. Henry Fonda was the epitome of old Hollywood discipline, known for his stoicism and reserved demeanor, while Peter was the free-spirited child of the 1960s. Their bond was loving but strained by generational and ideological gaps. Still, in interviews, Peter spoke admiringly of Henry's talent and unwavering commitment to his craft. He once joked that, while Henry might not have fully understood Peter's fascination with LSD and counterculture, he respected his son's dedication to forging his own identity. As the 1980s approached, Peter's career entered a quieter phase. The rebellious star was no longer the fresh face of youth culture. He took on character roles in various films and TV productions, sometimes shining in cameo appearances that traded on his iconic status. One of his more interesting undertakings was supporting the wave of independent cinema that emerged in the late 80s and early 90s, championed by filmmakers who saw Easy Rider as an inspiration. He consulted, participated in smaller projects, and occasionally attended film festivals where he was treated like a guru of the do-it-yourself approach. In the mid-1990s, Peter experienced a major resurgence in the public eye with Ulee's Gold, 1997. He played Ulee Jackson, a stoic beekeeper in Florida struggling to hold his family together. This performance marked a departure from the flashy rebellion of his younger days. Instead, it showcased a matured actor who had grappled with life's complexities and come out with a deeper, quieter sense of strength. Critics adored his nuanced portrayal of a man weighed down by responsibility, yet finding a kind of poetry in everyday perseverance. The role earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, a vindication of sorts after decades of living in the shadow of both his father's legendary status and the unstoppable success of Easy Rider. Though he didn't take home the Oscar, the nomination signaled that Peter Fonda had outlasted the label of counterculture icon and established himself as an actor of true depth. Despite the newfound recognition, Peter remained loyal to independent film. He was less concerned with being a mainstream star and more interested in participating in projects that spoke to him. He popped up in a variety of movies, some hits, some misses, but he never lost that genuine warmth or that rebellious glint in his eye. In many ways, he evolved into a mentor figure, encouraging younger directors and producers to maintain creative control, reminding them that sometimes the smallest film can have the biggest cultural impact if made from the heart. Even as the glitz of Hollywood and the rise of massive franchises dominated screens, Peter's convictions about self-production and creative freedom still resonated with up-and-coming talents. Away from the camera, Peter's personal life saw its share of ups and downs. He married and divorced multiple times, fathering children, including his daughter Bridget Fonda, who would go on to become an actress of note in the 1980s and 1990s. Friends and family describe him as simultaneously easygoing and intensely passionate, someone who could spend hours talking about social justice issues or the environment, then hop on his bike for a solo ride to clear his mind. He maintained a deep spiritual side, shaped by the existential questions that had intrigued him since his 20s. He believed in the power of personal freedom, be it in religion, politics, or simply the way one chose to live each day. As time wore on, Peter occasionally reconnected with the memory of Henry Fonda, who had passed away in 1982. In interviews, he shared emotional anecdotes about finally coming to peace with his father's reserved nature. He admitted that for most of his youth, he'd been rebelling not just against society, but also, in a quieter way, against the expectations that came with being a Fonda. In his later years, he seemed to find a balance, proud of his heritage, yet proud also of the path he had forged. His health became a concern in the 2010s. Aging didn't dim the spark in his eye, but it brought the usual aches and pains that come from a life spent on the road and an industry that can wear a person down. He continued working in smaller films, often comedic or dramatic cameos that let him add a bit of Fonda flair. He'd show up at film festivals for tributes to Easy Rider, always greeted with cheers from fans who remembered the moment that film hit theaters and changed the landscape of American cinema. Younger moviegoers, too, recognized him from his cameo roles or had discovered his earlier work on streaming services. There was a sense that Peter Fonda was no longer just a 1960s icon. He was a piece of living film history. Tragically, on August 16, 2019, Peter Fonda passed away at the age of 79 due to respiratory failure resulting from lung cancer. It was a sobering moment for the film community. When news broke, tributes poured in, celebrating him not just as the star of Easy Rider, but as a visionary who dared to stake out territory on behalf of independent cinema. The Fonda family, including sister Jane Fonda, shared their grief with the public. Jane wrote that she was very sad and reflected that, though they'd sometimes walked different paths, they remained deeply connected by that Fonda bond. Friends and collaborators, from Dennis Hopper's family to Jack Nicholson, remembered the special energy that Peter brought whenever he entered a room, an energy rooted in authenticity and a genuine curiosity about people. Fans across the country, especially those who'd come of age in the 1960s, felt a poignant loss. For them, Peter's passing symbolized another piece of that vibrant era gone. But they also remembered that rebellious grin, the sense of possibility he carried, and the reminder that yes, you could pick up a camera and make your own movie if you truly believed in it. Social media platforms lit up with personal stories, how someone watched Easy Rider at a drive-in and felt awakened, or how they once encountered Peter at a film festival and found him humble, approachable, eager to talk about the world. The roads he traveled in that iconic chopper might be quiet now, but the spirit rides on in the hearts of everyone who yearns for a more independent, fearless approach to art and life. The legacy Peter Fonda left behind extends far beyond that one legendary film. In many ways, he was a bridge. He carried the name and traditions of classic Hollywood, standing on set with Henry Fonda, sharing a legacy with Jane Fonda, yet he also lit the torch for a new generation of filmmakers who didn't want to be beholden to studios. Today, when we look at the thriving independent film scene, the success of film festivals like Sundance, and the rise of streaming platforms that give fresh voices a chance, we can trace much of that back to the kind of courage Peter displayed in the late 1960s. He proved that a small self-produced film, shot on location with a ragtag crew, could touch a cultural nerve more powerfully than something made under the watchful eyes of a studio system. Young directors who discovered Easy Rider decades later often cite it as the catalyst that made them think, I can do this myself. Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, among others, drew inspiration from the do-it-yourself ethic that Peter and his colleagues championed. Even though the style and content of modern indie films vary greatly, the principle of creative freedom remains the same. Find your story, gather the resources you can, and put your vision on screen without bending to formulaic demands. There are lesser-known tidbits about Peter that speak volumes about his character. One story that occasionally surfaces is about how, during the filming of Easy Rider, he negotiated for some of the local townspeople in the film's backcountry scenes to get paid fairly, not just a token fee. He believed that if they were contributing to the authenticity of the film, they deserved proper compensation. It wasn't a flashy gesture, but it highlighted his concern for the everyday folks who lived in the landscapes he loved to explore. Another anecdote from a friend mentions how, in his later years, Peter volunteered at local environmental cleanups. He'd show up in a beat-up pair of boots, pick up trash along the river, and strike up friendly conversations with anyone who passed by, never once acting like he was a movie star. When he died, colleagues offered heartfelt tributes. Jack Nicholson remembered the energy that Peter and Dennis Hopper brought to the set of Easy Rider, saying that it was unlike anything he'd experienced in the Hollywood of old. Martin Scorsese acknowledged that Easy Rider helped crack open the door that allowed him and others to experiment in the 1970s. Jane Fonda spoke simply of losing her sweet-hearted little brother, underscoring that behind the legend was a man who was part of a close-knit, if sometimes complicated, family. Fans shared recollections of meeting him at biker rallies. Yes, he'd still show up to those well into his 70s, where he'd shake hands, pose for pictures, and talk bikes with anyone who shared his passion. One particularly touching story comes from a small film festival in the early 2000s. Peter was attending a screening of a documentary about independent filmmakers. After the screening, a young director approached him, nervously clutching a DVD of her first feature. She admitted that Easy Rider had inspired her to drop out of film school and go make a road movie of her own with friends. Peter sat with her for nearly an hour, discussing camera techniques, how to handle distribution, and the importance of staying true to one's vision. Witnesses recalled how he never made her feel rushed or inferior. He radiated genuine warmth, as if seeing in her the same fire he'd possessed decades earlier. The young director left that conversation in tears of gratitude, saying she couldn't believe she'd just gotten a personal masterclass from the man who'd made her believe such things were possible. When reflecting on Peter's entire life, it's striking how the young rebel on the motorcycle matured into a thoughtful advocate for creative liberty. The external rebelliousness of the 1960s never fully left him. It just turned inward, becoming a guiding principle for everything he did. While he never achieved the same commercial or award-laden success as some of his contemporaries, there's a strong case to be made that his influence ran even deeper. He helped shift the cultural idea of what a movie could be. No matter how many years pass, we will remember Peter Fonda each time we see a rider on a lonely highway or catch a glimpse of an independent film that defies the odds. His story is our story, the story of an America always on the brink of transformation, fueled by restless spirits who refused to settle. With Peter's passing, we lost a beloved actor and dreamer, but we gained a legacy that keeps revving forward. In a world that can feel increasingly corporate and impersonal, the memory of Peter Fonda reminds us to hold tight to our passions, to trust our instincts, and to never, ever underestimate the power of following our own road. So here's to him, a rebel with a cause, a Hollywood prince who gave up the throne to ride free, and a guiding light for those who believe cinema is at its best when it's at its bravest. May the roar of that motorcycle continue echoing for generations to come. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.